Now, let's take a look at one of the bigger lines and one of the sharper lines against the peers, the fourth move, bishop g5. It's one of those variations that you better know with black, because well, otherwise it can be honestly a little intimidating. White is developing in a very fast manner, and sometimes there is this feeling of pawn avalanche coming your way, and it can be a little scary unless you know your lines. Yeah, as I know too well from my own experience when I was playing this with black in my younger years, where I was a successful player but not very well prepared, and then sometimes the dangers in openings they feel very, very real. So bishop g5, sharp line, and the one that we need to know well. But our first move is not difficult, right? We just play bishop g7, the standard response. And now white has a choice. White's lines here also will indicate the sort of plans that white is working with. So let's have a look at what these moves are. So white can continue with e5, just really directly going for it, trying to get some immediate opening initiative. Doesn't work too well, but we'll have a look at this. White can go queen d2, trying to connect the queen to the bishop, so to speak, to enable bishop h6 maybe sometimes, and then castle long. This is another one. Really big line is f4. It's one of those lines where, white tries to get this positional triangle, as I sort of like to think about this, of pawns, f4, e5, d4. And this makes it problematic for the bishop on g7 to be active. And then there is also a line which is a bit different than all these sharp attempts. It's just to play knight f3 and develop. So quite a lot of lines to cover, but don't worry, they are not very long, nor are they very difficult. So let's start with e5. It's a very direct attempt, and it's also not very dangerous, yeah, but it's one of those moves that are popular and you have to know them well. So I suggest to play knight fd7. There is a possibility to take here and take and exchange queens, but I feel that this rook on the d file will be sort of dangerous, and then the knight coming to d5, all of this. It's possible to play like this with black, but I just thought it would be, a little dangerous. No need for us to run any unnecessary dangers on move 5, so we keep the things closed for now. Knight fd7, there will be a lot of chances for black to get counterplay, because white's pawns in the center, they are also a little, vulnerable. White in general has a hard time defending these pawns in this opening. And now white immediately needs to decide what to do about this pawn on e5, right? It's the one which is immediately hanging. And once again, white has a choice between various structures, right? White can try to defend it with f4, or at some point white can also just take the pawn on d6. Yeah, so very, very different structures, but this is a good thing. Yeah, it will give us a good overview of, all sorts of pawn structures that are possible in this line. So a good thing. So let's start, in the beginning. So first things first, this structure is possible, but not very logical for white to play, because black actually gets like a really good version of some Sicilian, right? I mean, not quite. I actually thought it looks like a Sicilian dragon, but in the dragon, the pawn would be on e4, right? So something weird, yeah, something one of a kind. Maybe it looks a bit like a Veresov, right? If you are into that kind of thing. And in general, this knight on c3 is not well placed. Like normally, white would be trying to play something like queen d2 to castle long. And we just play knight f6. This knight was not doing too great on d7, restricting our other pieces, and we're not yet castling short just in case, right? Just to avoid bishop h6 and h4. So knight f6, castles long, and okay, h6, just to avoid bishop h6 once and for all. So we stop this, and basically now white will probably move the bishop to normally to h4, and then black will just develop a6, b5, bishop b7, knight bd7. It's very easy to make those moves, and I don't want to get too deep into this. Probably you will never get this position, and it's not a difficult one to play. It's important to sort of get the feel for this knight. This knight in general is just badly placed in this type of positions because, well, I mean, it's blocking the c2 pawn, and also the king on c1 is just behind it, and just makes it difficult to ever do anything about this. So this knight will likely remain awkward for a very long time, right? Especially given the fact that one day the rook will appear on the c file, and white just gets, an uncomfortable version of, wow, why not? Yeah, let's just call it Sicilian, yeah, to be done with this. So this structure is not dangerous for black at all. So let's just go back to that moment where white made this choice. Another move to mention is knight d5, well, only because it creates a winning threat of bishop takes e7. So this pawn needs to be protected, but it's not difficult to do this, right? Knight c6 defends the pawn, and we're getting ready to sort of throw the white pieces back. This is already very good for black, yeah? So knight d5 is not a good move. Just make sure that, you remember that you have an antidote, yeah? And then knight c6 is also not difficult to find. This leaves us with the main move here, f4. We castle. Basically, sometimes as one of the themes that we need to address in this opening, and in fact in many openings, right? When do we castle? Usually we castle as early as possible, but sometimes we try not to castle into an immediate attack. So basically we have to weigh these things. I mean, right now white has a king on e1 and a queen on d1, rook on a1. White is not ready to launch any immediate attacks, right? I mean, difficult to imagine h4, h5 working now. White is just not developed enough, which means it's safe for us to castle. And we long term, we get ready to undermine the white pawns in the center, right? I mean, they are, well, theoretically strong and active, but in reality, they are more of a liability to protect, really. So knight f3 is a good developing move, also defending the pawns. And the next move, knight b6, already gives us an idea of where this fight is going. Black is getting ready to play f6 to attack the bishop, and then to potentially open the f file for the rook. And in order to play f6, we actually need to cover this square. It's very important. We need to cover c4 so as not to run into the reality where white plays, bishop c4 with check, and then starts attacking on the king side, right? So we cover the square first, and force the bishop to, make a less active move, maybe bishop d3, and now play f6. And this is a very important pawn break to remember. Now, if you imagine white taking ef, ef, then you see that, white's pawn, white's plan basically proved unsuccessful because all white will have its weaknesses in the center and on the king side, and black rook is even coming to e8 with check, and then white's king is still on e1. It's unpleasant. And basically white tries in these lines at all costs to keep this pawn triangle alive. He plays bishop h4, f takes e5. Now this pawn is hanging. So normally f takes e5. And we play bishop g4. Now black is getting ready to continue attacking the central pawns. And the spin is really annoying. And I don't see anything white can do to compensate for this, right? So by the look of it, it seems to me white will lose one of the central pawns at least, and will have little compensation to show for it. So maybe there was a better way for white to play this line, but in general, this whole approach, and by this whole approach, I mean this early e5, is probably too early. It's a very popular way to play because people like to push their pawns, but white is just not entirely ready to do this. And other moves in this position are safer for white and probably also more dangerous, right? And we need to look at them as well in quite some detail. So moving on to white's next idea, next approach in this line, to the fifth move, knight f3. I don't know how you feel about this. To me, it looks a bit odd to combine bishop g5 and knight f3. Although there is nothing wrong with that. Yeah, to me, it feels more logical to combine bishop g5 with f4 or with queen d2. But in general, right, once again, developing pieces is not a mistake, cannot be wrong. And this is a plausible way to play chess. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. And it's also important to know that the last two moves you could play in either move order, right, to get to this position. So I could also go knight f3, bishop g7, bishop g5, same position. So let's return to our move order and then talk a bit about this. So knight f3, I think it's not as critical as some other continuations. We immediately castle, and now basically white has several approaches. One of them is the direct e5. Once again, just like in the previous line, trying to go for some direct play. Once again, it doesn't really work amazingly. And the other one is queen d2, returning to this more traditional setup of preparing castling long. So these are our choices. So let's start by looking at this e5. Once again, we keep the d file closed. I sometimes feel that opening the d file and exchanging on d1 actually makes it more dangerous for black, despite the exchange of queens, because white just becomes so active. So we just keep it closed and we try to attack white's central pawns, right, once again. And now white actually has a plan. These days, most people across all levels really have some idea of what they're doing in the opening. And the plan behind this line is to play queen e2. So basically the slightly unusual way of playing where white blocks the bishop on f1 and in a way also the rook on h1. Now these two pieces are difficult to develop, but also has some plans, right? The immediate threats are e6 and ed we have some softness of the pawn on e7, right? And white also is ready to castle long. So this is the idea, but of course it's black to move, and black can do quite a lot to defend against the immediate threats. So the easiest is to just take this pawn on e5. This was a dangerous pawn. It's best to remove it. And the point of this capture is also the following, right? If white now simply recaptures, then black plays knight b6, which suddenly makes it difficult for white to castle long. And black is controlling the d file, which means that castling long is not legal. I probably shouldn't tell you this because you know this, but it has actually happened to many good players, me included, that sometimes this thing that you cannot castle over an attacked square, sometimes it's not intuitive. At least I have lost, tournament blitz games where, I castled and my opponent was like, no, you cannot do this, right? So sometimes you have to pay attention to this, yeah? But anyway, now white cannot castle long, and this whole plan with queen e2 becomes a bit pointless, right? White cannot castle short, cannot castle long, so what is white doing? And the idea is definitely not to take on e5, but to castle long. And now a pawn on e5 is hanging, and the pawn on e7 remains vulnerable, right? Which is why we cannot take on d4. White will take bishop takes e7 and attack a bunch of, good pieces. And now it's actually very important to see what happens over the next couple of moves. I find this structure that will arise very useful to pay attention to. So h6, always good to kick this bishop first, at least to make it decide on a diagonal. Now white sacrificed the pawn, and this pawn needs to be attacked, which means white really doesn't have a choice, needs to go to h4. And now I really like the following resource. Here I'll play e4. Basically, just to prevent d takes e5. This rook gets very active once the d file is open, but we have the ways to keep the file closed. And now basically, if white takes with the queen, then we can go knight f6, attack the queen. So knight takes e4 is much more natural and logical. And the next move is really important. Yeah, we'll play knight f6. Once again, the knight leaves the d7 square to open the path for the other pieces. But also, very importantly, this structure that rises after knight f6, e takes f6, maybe I can just, make this move. This structure gives black a 4-pawn shield in front of the king, and this king basically will be forever safe. You might have seen these structures in a Caro-Kann, and I myself have a soft spot for this type of a plan where I make my king really, really safe, and this just helps me to play chess better. And I think this will work for most players, you included. Just this knight f6 is really a wonderful device, even if the computer sometimes disagrees. But normally you're not playing tournament games against a computer and against any human being. Just keeping your king closed behind the pawn wall and protected is a very good practical approach. So this structure will encounter more of it, very, very important. And now let's go back. we're done with this particular line. And now let's take a look at queen d2. Basically, white is preparing the usual stuff, right? The usual stuff being, castle long, and then h4, bishop h6, h5, and mate along the h file. But these are 1, 2, 3, 4 mini moves, and in chess you can do quite a lot in one move, and you can do infinitely a lot in 3 or 4 moves, right? So you have to remember that all these attacks, they take time, and you are not helpless, right? You can do a lot of things, and usually these things are in the center of the board. So that's how I was taught when I was a kid. When facing the attack, you engage your opponent in the center. Of course, a lot of things happened and changed since I was a kid, but this rule basically still seems to apply. We played d5. I really like this bit because it happens so rarely in this opening. Usually, our counterplay is c5 or e5, but the Pirc is a very flexible opening. Structurally, one of its great advantages, and sometimes we, even get to play d5, like in this position. And one of the reasons why we get to play d5 is the vulnerable spot of this bishop on g5. And in general, the vulnerability of this bishop on g5 is a big part of this line. It basically tells immediately here, and normally e5 would be, a good move, a standard reaction to have this powerful pawn chain in the center. But the problem is, after knight e4, white is especially badly placed to react. Both this bishop is hanging on g5, and the knight is on f3. You remember I told you these pieces, they sometimes do not combine together well, and you can see it. You can see it now. If white takes on e4, then this knight is hanging, has to go back. Now the bishop is hanging, and basically we just take this bishop and then blow up the center. The pawns will be very difficult to protect in any run, long run, short run, any run, and the black bishops will be very powerful no matter what white does. So this is just sort of an illustration of how things can go wrong for white very quickly. So let's go back. This is another mistake, a typical mistake. A lot of people take bishop takes f6 in this position because, well, they want to win the pawn on d5. But we have already encountered this structure. This is a very powerful way to recapture. Once again, we create this wall of pawns and make the king forever safe. But also we open the e file, and white has no good way of recapturing. Taking with a knight runs into f5, just opening everything up. And after ed, knight d7, we easily win this pawn back. We combine it with ideas to harass the white king, and black is left with powerful bishops and a good position. So this is something we are basically aiming to get with black. This fortress, if I may, on the king side, where we keep the 4 pawns in front of the king, and this just makes the king forever safe. Yeah, and it's just such a pleasant feeling to play chess when your own king is safe. Makes you free to explore all sorts of ideas everywhere on the chessboard. So this is a nice thing. And moving on. So bishop takes f6, not a good move. And e5 wasn't too good either. So taking on d5 is probably what white should do. Take it back. And now black is ready to do things like c5, using the fact that there is some counterplay along the diagonal. Black can also develop with knight e6, bishop g4. And all these things, they are possible because black bishop on g7 is so active. And that's why white tries to immediately exchange it, and still maybe, thinking about going h4, h5, and getting aggressive on the king side. So we need to pay some attention, of course, to what white is doing. Take knight c3. Bishop g7, it's important in order to be able to take back with the queen. Queen takes c3. Optically, feels very nice for white. I've actually been criticized by some, native English speakers for saying something like this. I've been told I should say it looks very nice, but sometimes I start, the sentence with optically, and I don't know how to finish it. So yeah, it looks very nice for white, but here the appearances are a bit deceptive because this check is not really so frightening. So we can just play knight d7. And we are ready to just play knight f6 next move, right? Check or no check, it doesn't matter. Castles long, knight f6. I will basically get into a battle where both sides have chances, right? White king is safe on c1, black king is safe on g7. White will probably try to develop this bishop and play rook to e1. And black can play something like queen d6, bishop g4. Basically, it's a game with mutual chances. We couldn't really ask for much more from any opening, right? So this basically is what we need to know in this line. This, once again, was a line where white played knight f3 on move 5, queen d2, d5, and we saw that no matter what white does here, black gets, above all, a very safe position, right? And safe positions are easy to play, which leaves us with two of the more crucial continuations, more critical continuations, f4 and queen d2. So let's take a look at those. So now moving to the more critical continuations. One of them is f4. And it's a big line. It's a big part of white's plan. Basically, the plan being to play e5 and get this 3 pawns. We already saw the various versions of this. Sometimes these pawns are strong, sometimes less so. Here we castle, and this critical position, we'll have to look at the bunch of continuations, or actually not such a big bunch. e5 here is early. And we saw I think this just knight of d7 would immediately transpose to some other line we had. But most importantly here, knight g4 is even stronger. It's the same thing. Black is threatening f6, c5, but here also knight e3, right? So white is just not ready for this. So we can just discard e5, forget it exists, it doesn't work. And more sort of prudent move and more normal move is knight f3. White basically tries to finish the development first, and maybe then play e5. So play c5 here. It's a typical way of creating counterplay. We will encounter it in various places quite a lot. The idea being to play queen a5 after white takes on c5. You have probably seen it in a lot of other openings, but in the pairs, it's really your bread and butter, c5 and queen a5, attacking this pawn, and also this knight on c3. So this will come to your rescue in a lot of places in this line. So d takes c5 is normal. A lot of people played e5 in this position, but he just doesn't work. C takes d4, white loses material after ef, this bishop is hanging, the knight is hanging, the rook on e8 is threatening. It just doesn't work. So just trust me on this. So this is normal queen a5, threatening to take this pawn on e4, and white has to take this threat seriously. Can of course just defend this pawn, queen c5, but now white will end up trying to castle long anyway, since, you know, castling short just is out of question. This is one of the drawbacks of having the bishop on g5. With the bishop somewhere else, white could still go like queen e2 and bishop e3. And the bishop on g5 can sometimes be, just cut out. Cut out is probably wrong, right? Cut off from the main field of battle. So sometimes can be a bit useless there on g5, as it is in this case. So it's probably better for white to just go queen d2, defend this pawn, and get ready to castle long. White basically just doesn't need bishop d3 here. So queen c5. It's basically almost always correct to avoid taking in this way. This pawn structure, after d takes c5, and then white plays e5, you basically end up giving white very strong central pawns. So it's best to avoid this. So queen c5 is almost always the correct response. Castles long. And okay, here we can basically choose between various setups. White is sort of, kind of threatening bishop f6 and knight d5. We could do a lot of things about this. Bishop e6 is a very solid way of dealing with this threat and develop a piece in the meantime. And basically after this, black is just planning to continue the development and one day start attacking the white king on c1. It does not immediately look this way, but this king will be vulnerable in the fight to come. Knight d4 looks natural. Play knight c6, forcing white to react. Knight takes e6, f takes e6, and now white has two bishops, but black has a much faster development. This rook will come to c8, this rook is active on f8, and knight g4 is a really unpleasant threat to deal with. And you probably noticed this, these pawns, they created more of a weakening for white's position than anything else. And this is the way it often goes. So when I saw this position for the first time, something in me wanted to put this pawn back to f3 and play bishop e3. This would be more solid, but pawns don't go back, and this is the one thing which makes chess the game we love. So the pawns don't go back. You have to take some responsibility for your decisions. So this is a nice line for black. In fact, it wasn't even so difficult. And now we are left with the last of our major options on move 5, queen d2. And I think in a way it's also the most harmonious way to play. I think it's logical to follow up bishop g5 with queen d2, getting ready to play maybe bishop h6 and maybe castle long. And who knows if this pawn will belong on f4 or not, right? So queen d2 is logical. h6, always good to ask this question of the bishop and to make white decide. H6 also, prevents bishop h6 forever, which is a good thing, right? We don't want to keep thinking when white will play bishop h6. So now white has, some replies. Well, we can take a look at a lot of them, all of them briefly. So bishop f4, to me, always looks weird to place the bishop on f4 because it just looks to me that the bishop is not well placed here, vulnerable to all the attacks with g5 or knight h5 or e5. But so many people seem to like it that we have to address this. In this position, I quite like a6. It's a rare motif in our repertoire in this course, but it does exist in a lot of openings and variations. In the periods, it's less frequent than in the modern defense, where you very often have the same structure but with a knight on g8. But a6 and b5 can be a very nice way to develop for black. And now we also won some time because white, went to g5 and then went to f4 with the bishop. So we sort of, I think, have a tempo of sorts. And here we are very fast, threatening b4 and forcing white to do something about this pawn on e4. White can, of course, defend this pawn, and here I have a feeling it will be much easier for black to attack because white doesn't have really anything, and black has an easy plan of playing knight b6 and pushing those pawns. I'm playing knight b6 first to make sure that I cover a4 so that the white knight doesn't have anywhere halfway active to go. And after knight b6, b4, this knight will have to go back, right? And this sort of will give us more time. White can also play e5. But then after knight h5, it's you see it already, right? This bishop is hanging, and it's difficult to do something about it because the white pawn on e5 is also hanging. So there is no good way to prevent knight takes f4, after which black will build up something along this line, some harmonious setup where we develop all the pieces, and at the end of the day black will be left with two hopefully very powerful bishops. And in general, it's just not clear why white wasted the tempo by going bishop g5 and then going bishop f4. Bishop takes f6 is a possible move, but abandons the bishops. Bishop takes f6. It's unclear why. We have just two strong bishops, especially this dark squared one. Especially this guy is very strong because, presses this pawn and has no counterpart. So after possible e5, white will have a lot of dark square weaknesses. f4, e5, just to prevent this. And basically, it's unclear what white got for these bishops. So white should not. White should just not take on f6. And you probably also asked yourself, what about e takes f6, getting our favorite structure? This is also a perfectly playable approach. So you could also do this. anyway, this move, bishop takes f6, does not really deserve so much attention. Another move which is not great is bishop e3. This move in combination with queen d2 is logical, is nice, but should be played earlier. So you should not go bishop g5 first. h6 turns out to be very useful here. And we attack the bishop. The pawn actually takes an important square. And after bishop f4, knight c6 is a very funny moment when we attack this pawn. And white can do a lot of plausible looking moves. Like white can play d5, white can play h3, white can play f3. And after any of those moves, we play e5 with black, attacking the bishop on f4, and get a very good game because we'll likely be able to recapture with the g4 knight on e5 and just get a very active position with a lot of development. So all of those moves, they basically just don't work. And white has to play bishop h4, which is also, a consistent way of playing chess, right? White played bishop g5, and after h6, white plays bishop h4 because this diagonal has some promise. So g5 is a very clear plan. We hunt this bishop down, bishop g3, knight h5, getting two bishops. This bishop has nowhere to go. I mean, there are some positional things to consider in this line, but they're not very difficult. So one thing is, for instance, if white plays knight e2, well, it's almost a naive approach because we will not take on g3 now, right? When white is ready to recapture with a knight. So after knight g to e2, you have to stop for at least one move, play c5, and just open the diagonal without, immediately taking. And then the white setup on the king side begins to look a bit silly, right? The knight is on e2, cannot move, doesn't have any squares to go to, and prevents anything from developing. And even if white takes and plays queen d8, king d8, nothing changes really. On the queen side, on the king side, white still has this trouble with the knight on e2. So this is a better move. And he too, okay, we can take on g3 now, but we don't have to because this bishop is not running away. So we can just play knight d7, threatening c5 to open this diagonal. If white forces us to take, then we do take. But this bishop is also not great on e2, right? And we open this diagonal, recapture with knight on c5, and get a very good game with two bishops. And another move, okay, it's not really a good move, but it's a nice trick to remember. After f4, we can actually take this pawn twice, and white cannot really recapture on f4 because there is a tactical trick. You might want to find it yourself. It's not very difficult. Bishop takes d4, you've probably seen, and white cannot really take on d4 because of e5. It's not an important line. I just wanted, notice a tactical trick and wanted to show it, that sometimes this squares f4 and the pawn on d4, they can both be vulnerable also tactically, right? Sometimes it happens with vulnerable squares. They also create tactical vulnerabilities. And then there is this move, which we have seen before in various places. White tries to open the D file, and white will not succeed because we will not take on E5 so easily, right? We try to keep things closed. Play knight B6. In these lines, it's sometimes useful that, the square D5 is controlled. And also the square C4. Yeah, this knight is doing a good defensive job here. And we are ready to develop the bishop and then to castle long. Maybe it was not altogether obvious, and I maybe should have mentioned it before, but with the pawns on h6, g5, maybe we're not necessarily castling short, right? Here we can actually take some time. The position is pretty closed. Can take some time to castle long. And now basically white can try various setups, but they will not make so much difference. Like bishop d3 stops bishop f5, but we can go bishop e6. It doesn't really matter so much to us. And then we follow queen d7 and castles long. Knight g to e2, for instance. Queen d7, then castle long, king b8, and fight. Both kings are pretty safe, so we can, play a normal positional game. At some point, black will be left with two bishops because this bishop still cannot run away. And I have a feeling black has a fair share of chances. I can also simply defend the central pawn on e5, which was sort of hanging with queen e3. Bishop f5, it's very similar, right? It's the same thing, really. Black plays queen d7, castles long, and we get sort of a nice complex battle. White has some space, but the space also comes with responsibilities, right? These pawns, they can be vulnerable in the long run. I feel that black's position might, even be easier to play because, the bishops, and white constantly has to prove something here. So this was, I think, the story of bishop g5. At the end of the day, it wasn't really quite as difficult as I anticipated. So basically here, white has various setups. Queen d2 followed by bishop h6, or f4 followed by e5, or knight f3, or e5 immediately. We, I think, covered all of them, and have a feeling that this is all much safer for black than I thought, 30 years ago when I was playing these positions with black. But okay, it's fair enough. A lot of things can change in 30 years. So yeah, I think we did a pretty good coverage of these lines, and we'll move on to something else. So just when I thought I was done with this line, I suddenly realized I missed a variation. Apologies for that. So late is, how do they say, better late than never. So let's have a brief look at it. So we're not yet done with bishop g5, not completely, because there is this line, which I really wanted to show you, but I somehow missed it. So f4 castles, and now queen d2. So this is an important move order combining the two ideas of queen d2 and f4, and a reasonably popular setup as well. And also there is a story behind it which reminded me that I didn't show this line. h6 is our move here. And now, okay, bishop f6 is the same as before. We get these pawns and very, very safe, and definitely not a critical way for white to continue. And the critical way is bishop h4. And there is a story with this position. As 25 years ago at an Olympiad in Istanbul, I was playing one of my first Olympiads, and I remember we went out to eat something one evening, and I was joined by Grandmaster Tkachov from Kazakhstan, and I complained about my black repertoire, which included this position, and I didn't know how to play it. And back then we didn't really have computers, and then Tkachov told me that e5 is a possible move here, and I had no idea. He was the first one to play it in 2000, in the year 2000, right? And back then in the restaurant, when he told me about this move, okay, we're just talking, analyzing blindfold, right? And I must confess, I didn't confess to him then. At first, I just didn't have a clue what he was talking about, because e5 just didn't look like a move that that could possibly work. Like, after all, white has this pin, right? How could e5 work? And I must have been a bit confused, because, okay, the trick is not so difficult. It just visually doesn't look like it should work. But, you know, I didn't say anything back then. I was like, yeah, e5, very beautiful. But at the time I was like, e5 doesn't look like it could possibly work. Maybe I'm seeing the wrong position. Yeah, but then, you know, when preparing for this course, it turned out e5 is actually correct. The trick is, of course, knight takes e4, right? We're using the fact that the bishop on h4 is hanging, the queen is hanging on d2. And this allows us to play e5 with impunity. And the lines are not too difficult. So if white takes d takes e5, knight takes e4, this actually ends badly for white. Bishop d8, knight d2, and then knight takes f1, d takes e5, and white gets a bad ending, or a worse ending. So not a great outcome for white from any opening. After knight f3, e takes f4, it's a pawn sack that will probably turn into a piece sacrifice. White can play like this if they feel, you know, like an adventure, but most likely they won't, because, well, people don't really sacrifice things for long-term compensation anymore. And this leaves us with this capture, f takes e5, knight takes e4. And once again, exchanging queens is bad for white, because black will get the better of it. And after queen f4, knight g5, castles long, basically get a sharp and a very playable position for black, where black attacks this pawn on e5. If necessary, we can, you know, attack it further. And white also has some tricks, but I think black has enough play. If you analyze this position and you feel there are some dangers here, although I think this position is going to be fine, then a bit earlier, around here, we could also just take on e5 back. D takes e5, and then, you know, exchange queens, and then attack the e5 pawn a few times, and play the ending, which is also fine. Black has a very healthy position and a number of ways to play it. And basically, yeah, that is pretty much it for this line. And I was mainly reminded of the fact that I missed it in my recording, because I remembered this story of Tkachev telling me about this position 25 years ago in some shady restaurant in Istanbul. And the trick is this. And having seen this, then we also covered this position. And now we can go back again and now really say that we covered all the major lines that white has in this position, and they include e5, they include f4, they include queen d2, knight f3, and all the combinations of the above, right? And now I think we are finally done with bishop g5, and yeah, I think it was sort of a nice journey also through some old memories for me.